Breaking news. Russia hopes that redistribution of wealth will strengthen the government. The same concerns are raised over Russia's economic future every time. Western sanctions, rising military spending, and shifting trade patterns toward Asia. Two other trends, however, remain unaddressed: the rise of nationalization and the resurgence of privatization. Despite their apparent incompatibility, these trends may actually complement one another, leading to a sea change in Russia's social composition and the consolidation of the country's political system. Since Russia invaded Ukraine, a lot of property has changed hands. Retailers, restaurants, and coffee shops, like McDonald's, IKEA, and Starbucks, automakers, like Ford and Mercedes, and retail banks, like Home Credit and Société Générale, are just some of the Western companies that left workers behind when they left the country. Getting out of Russia is increasingly difficult. Foreign investors from unfriendly countries, as determined by the Russian government, are prohibited by decree issued by President Vladimir Putin in August 2022 from selling or transferring their stakes in strategic companies operating in Russia's financial and energy sectors. Putin alone has the authority to issue exemptions. Later, in December, the government enacted a rule that made it illegal for foreign companies to leave Russia without first selling their assets at a discount of at least 50% below market value. By April 2023, Putin had authorized the expropriation of foreign-owned assets in response to the seizure and freezing of Russian assets abroad, and by March 2023, those requirements had been expanded to include a compensation payment to the state. The energy companies Fortum of Finland and Uniper of Germany were among the first to fall victim to the latter measure. They may not have been formally nationalized, but their local subsidiaries will likely never be reclaimed by their former parents. Despite the interest shown by foreign investors, state assets have remained popular. When arguing for widespread privatization, former Accounts Chamber head Alexei Kudrin cited the fact that the state sector accounted for more than half of Russia's GDP in 2019. Nearly 75% of oil and gas industry profits came from state-owned enterprises. Russian businesspeople who voluntarily or involuntarily left the country and liquidated their assets, including stakes in internet services giant Yandex, telecom company Vimpelcom, and online bank Tinkoff, have also provided funds for redistribution. For this reason, both state-owned and privately held assets in Russia are changing hands at steep discounts, as are those of foreign companies and Russian businesspeople. The authorities will have to figure out what to do with them now. State Bank VTB CEO Andrei Kostin has shown his support for privatization as an option by acquiring the rival Otkritie Group in one of the largest deals in Russian banking history last December, without holding an auction or giving much thought to antitrust restrictions. Kostin's privatization push is comprehensive, extending to cognac producers in addition to Russian railways, the Transneft oil pipeline company, the Rostec defense conglomerate, and more. Despite suffering record losses in 2022, VTB will still be able to participate in the asset slicing at low prices due to its position as Russia's second-largest bank. Elvira Nabiullina, Anton Silvanov, and Maxim Reshetnikov, who head the government's financial and economic bloc, agree with Kostin and support privatization. However, they favor targeted privatization over widespread reform. Kostin's defense of privatization, that it is necessary to introduce in order to pique investors' interest and stop the outflow of capital, is instructive. The volume of transfers to foreign banks tripled in 2022, as reported by the central bank, indicating that most people who wanted to get their money out of Russia did so at that time. While those with over 10 million rubles in savings accounted for nearly 30% of all deposits, the average Russian citizen had less than 1% of their wealth in the bank. Just 0.1% of depositors, roughly 20,000 people, clearly cannot or do not want to transfer their funds internationally. The same is true of the tens of thousands of Russians who work for the government in various capacities, especially in security and oversight agencies. Since they are unable to export their wealth and are generally uneducated when it comes to investing in Asia, their money is just sitting there, waiting for better times and another redistribution to come along. What can the law enforcement do? The solution is simple. Buy up the surplus property at a steep discount and redistribute it in a way that makes sense for the sector. Russia has perfected a form of quasi-nationalization or pseudo-privatization, in which private financial, natural resource, and energy companies are absorbed by state banks and corporations. The newly rich and upper middle class, typically those between the ages of 35 and 55 who have completed post-secondary education, will benefit from the redistribution of non-strategic assets, such as those in the retail sector. These individuals have amassed their wealth through state-affiliated projects, such as road building, or through senior positions at state companies and private firms with Western investors. Forbes claims that the old oligarchs, former chief executive officers of Western companies' Russian subsidiaries, and entrepreneurs from the provinces have already been given control of a sizable chunk of Western assets. Companies from Asia, particularly China, are also involved. These businesses have the backing of their respective governments. After amassing wealth through minor corruption, public servants, including representatives of the security state, may decide to participate, though they will likely do so only through proxies. Putin's regime may find support from all of these factors. As the middle class shrank and left Russia, the country's social structure began to resemble an hourglass. The country's current direction has the potential to help the middle class, too, transforming a structure that looked like it might collapse at any moment into a far more stable trapezoid. The new regime will use the state's increased asset base in natural resources, energy, and heavy industry as the basis for its economy. However, the president's closest advisors and their descendants, along with a few other officials who hold significant stakes in companies or directorships with ties to the state, will be at the top of the new social hierarchy. The more people the state regulates, the more there will be. To some extent, international sanctions will shape Russia's middle class by causing wealthy Russians to shift their attention to the domestic market. With the promise of cheap, high-quality assets in exchange for their support, the regime hopes to turn them into radical, patriotic supporters. Even a people's privatization, in which the wealthy are given minority stakes in state companies, is possible. The success of Russia's pivot to Asia, as well as the avoidance of catastrophe on the Ukrainian front, will be crucial. However, this may have the unintended consequence of extending the regime's rule and opening the door to a peaceful transfer of power in the future.